Still in chapter 6?
Yeah, but I think we'll finish it up tonight. All right. Yes, we are on Genesis chapter 6 with verse 14. Now, just to kind of put this in context, I'll back up to verse 13. It says, Then God said to Noah, The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. Now, there has been speculation for years as to what in the world is gopher wood, because there is no such tree as a gopher tree. You find that amusing? So let me tell you where this term gopher wood comes from. Nobody really knows what the correct translation of this is, because in the original Hebrew, it is gopher. What God told Noah to do is to make it out of gopher wood. And since nobody has any clue what the Hebrew word gopher meant, because it's one of those words that's only found one time in the entire Bible, right here, in this context.
Do you know how to spell that?
How to
Gopher?
Well, in
The
this,
Hebrew?
huh?
The Hebrew spelling of it? I mean, I know it's. I'll spell it.
Do you want me to spell it in Hebrew?
Gopher sounds like you're saying target, like people do about Target. But I mean, gopher, is it a noun?
I'm pronouncing
adjective?
it in the Hebrew pronunciation.
But is it like an adjective to describe it, or is it the name of a tree?
Yes, it basically is Hebrew scholars think it's a type of tree. But the reason it's transliterated as gopher wood is because, again, this is the only place in the Bible this particular Hebrew word is found. And
it's not used anywhere else outside the Bible to refer to a tree?
well, not when you look at
Maybe
the
it's a
fact
type
that
of
this
tree that was destroyed by the flood and is no longer around
It
anymore.
could be. Now, the best guess, and that's all it is, some Hebrew scholars think that it may be talking about cypress wood or something of that nature, because, well, frankly, experiments have been done with cypress that you take it and seal it up with tar. You can throw cypress wood in the water and just let it sit there for months, and it will not get waterlogged and it won't sink. So a lot of folks think this might be the Hebrew word, or I should say ancient Hebrew word, for cypress. But again, they don't know for sure. So translators over the years have transliterated it. And everybody remember the difference between a translation and a transliteration? Anybody not?
One's the actual, one's like what it's thought to be.
No. I'll use the Spanish word adios. Everybody know what adios means? Yeah.
Right.
Now,
Go with God.
well, not really. It means bye.
Adios.
Adios means go with God.
Well, okay. Well, yeah,
Yes,
okay. And
yes.
that's all right. Whatever. The translation of adios would be goodbye, or whatever you want.
Literally,
Yeah.
it means go with God, but
Okay.
they use it as goodbye.
Goodbye. Transliteration would be, instead of translating it to goodbye, we would just say adios.
Hasta luego.
Mm-hmm.
Ciao.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Or, yeah.
Via is go.
You want to elaborate on that?
No, have a Spanish class.
Yeah.
From Hebrew to Spanish.
Hors d'oeuvres. Everybody knows what an hors d'oeuvre is, right? Well, if we were to translate the word hors d'oeuvres, it basically means snack food. But nobody translates it. We take it straight out of the French and have brought it into English as a transliteration. Well, that's the difference. You know, one, all you do is just put the letters into whatever the new language is and just take it the way it is. A translation is you find what the meaning is and go with the word, you know, in the other language, that whatever that means. Well, since we don't know what the translation of this Hebrew word gopher is, although again, as I said, some believe it might be Cyprus, what they've done over the years is just transliterate it and take the Hebrew letters that spell out gopher and put English in it, and it comes out gopher. But as we said, there's no such thing as a gopher tree, so nobody really knows what gopher wood is. So I say that for this reason. Not that this is some big, great theological point, but every time I've studied this in the past, people always want to know, what in the world is gopher wood? Well, we don't know.
Just don't kill all the gophers.
Yeah. Apparently gophers must make trees. But the best guess is, as I said, Cyprus. But that's a guess. All right. Now, and then in the latter part of it, literally what the Hebrew says is to pitch it with pitch. In other words, seal it up on both sides with tar. And as I've mentioned, biblical scholars and archaeologists have taken cypress and a few other types of wood similar to that and spread tar on it, put it, immersed it in water, and you can let it sit there for months and it won't get waterlogged and it will not sink, which is pretty much what God is telling Noah to do here. Verse 15, it says, "And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Well, if a cubit is about 18 inches, then how long is this boat going to be?
450 feet.
About 450 feet long.
Football field and a half.
Yep. Its breadth, 50 cubits. So you're looking there at, about 75 feet wide?
Yep.
And its height, 30 cubits. So about 45 feet high. And so you're looking at a good-sized ship made out of wood here. Now, oceanographers and engineers have taken the dimensions of what you see right here and actually have reconstructed boats of similar size. They've also done, scale models and what have you. And I know this is going to come as a shock to you, but they said that in extremely violent weather with heavy waves and what have you, these particular dimensions are about the most stable that you can put in the water. It will not capsize, and it won't break up. It's amazing that God just happens to know what the most stable dimensions for a boat would be. And that's exactly what he told Noah.
Got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How'd they get it from the land into the water?
They waited for the water to come.
Why would they have to?
The water came to them.
Yeah, the water came to the boat.
So they just stayed in the ark until the floods came.
That's exactly what they did.
Hung out.
And as we continue reading, when we get to chapter 7, you'll find that's exactly what they did. Why would you even need to put it in the water if the water's coming to you?
That's why they left it.
Mm-hmm. All right, verse 16. You shall make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit from the top. In other words, at the very top level of this, and by the way, as we'll get into this, in fact, the latter part of verse 16 tells us that it had 3 decks in it. So the very top part is the only area that's got windows. And once again, engineers have found that particular design would naturally lend to airflow in and out of the ark as the wind would blow past it. Why do you think that having a window up at the top would naturally produce airflow inside, even down in the lower decks?
It's like a chimney, causes a draw.
Yep, because also consider this, and for those that I know we got, you're a pilot and you've done some flying and what have you. Anybody?
I'm an
For you
engineer.
engineers in here, you're the Navy. What do you know
I'm
about
an
it?
engineer.
Yeah, okay. What do we know about the faster that when wind or a fluid, which includes air, by the way, I know you're thinking that fluid's water. In engineering, any substance that moves around, which includes gas or liquid, is considered a fluid. In fluid dynamics, the faster the fluid moves, what happens?
Lowers the pressure.
It lowers the pressure. That's the same reason that a plane can actually fly. Because if you've ever noticed a plane the wing is flat on the bottom, but it's curved over on the top, which as a wing is slicing through the air, it causes the air on top to go over faster than it does on the bottom. The faster the movement, the lower the pressure. That's what literally lifts a plane off the ground. Well, notice God told Noah to put the windows in the upper level, where the breeze would be. So as the breeze is coming by those windows, what's that naturally going to do inside? It's going to produce a suction that would then cause the air from inside to rise and go out. And of course, so what you've got there is a natural flow of air, because as air goes out, then naturally as it produces a vacuum, then air is going to come back in, and you're going to have this constant breathing effect within inside, even down in the lower decks. It just astounds me that Noah, who probably, I seriously doubt, we really don't know what Noah did for a living, but I seriously doubt that Noah knew a whole lot about these kind of engineering marvels, but guess who does? So God has told him to build a ship that is extremely stable in violent weather, naturally produces aeration, and he's got 3 decks in here. The rest of verse 16 said, finish it to a cubit from the top, and set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. So the door is on the side, which probably could have been lowered, which would facilitate what for the animals?
The ramp.
Yeah, it makes a ramp where all they got to do is walk right up into it. Verse 17, and behold, now God's getting to the point as to why he's telling Noah to build an ark. And by the way, just so you know, even though in English we call the Ark of the Covenant, and then this big ship an ark, it's actually 2 different words in Hebrew. It comes out, we've translated it as ark in English, but they're 2 different things. And behold, even I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. Now, he says, notice it, all flesh in which is the breath of life. Do you remember that the Hebrew word for breath is the same as the Hebrew word for spirit? Same word. Which is why, when God says that he breathed life into Adam, it literally says that God put his spirit in Adam. Verse 18 says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind, 2 of every kind shall come to you to keep them alive. And as for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. This Noah did to all that God had commanded him, so he did. Now, a few things we need to keep in mind in understanding what actually happened at this point. First off, it says that he took 2 of everything, but there was an exception to that. Because if you go on into chapter 7, look in verse 2 of chapter 7. You shall take with you of every clean animal by 7s, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and his female. Well, if it goes by 7s, a male and his female, well, a male and a female is an even number, isn't it? So how can it say by sevens a male and his female?
Mine says 7 pairs.
That's the point there. The
It's
implication
by
here.
sevens.
Huh?
It's plural, sevens.
Uh-huh.
So pairs of seven.
Yeah, the implication here, or what God's telling him, is not just 7, but 7 pair, male and female. So whenever we have the idea in our mind that there was only 2 of everything, that is not true. In chapter 6, it says 2 of everything, but chapter 7, verse 2 tells us that there was an exception to that. All the clean animals took in 7 pair of them. Why do you think God told him to take 7 pair of the clean animals?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifices. Also, if everything on the earth is destroyed, by the time the flood waters receded, what would have happened to all the plant life on the earth?
Dead. No food.
That would have been devastated. Plants would have, sprouted again, but that could have taken months before there was any edible food available. So what would have, Noah have done for food in the meantime? God told him to take some food with you, and he said it would be food for you and for the animals while they're on the ark. But that's only going to last for just so long. It's at this point, after the flood, that God allowed humanity to eat meat. So not only would it have been for sacrifice, but now, instead of just sacrificing the animals, they would have sacrificed them and eaten them. Before that, there is no record anywhere that humanity ate meat. We were vegetarians at that point. And that's not just speculation. The Bible, remember, we studied about 2 chapters back where God told us that all the fruit and the produce of the ground was for food for us. Nowhere in the Bible does it ever say that we were created to eat meat until after the flood. So you've got clean animals by sevens and then a pair of everything else. Also notice here of what's absent. Back to chapter 6, verse 19 says, of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. And here in verse 20 he gets specific. Of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind, 2 of every kind shall come to you in the ark. Now, when the Bible refers to creeping things, what do you think that's talking about?
Snake.
Yeah, the Bible actually tells, the Hebrew word there actually basically means reptilians. Amphibians, reptiles, things of that sort. That's what the Bible refers to as talking about creeping things. When it's talking about animals, in most cases we're talking about mammals. So you've got birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. What's not present here?
Fish.
Fish, for obvious reasons, because the fish don't need to go on there. Now, you might think, well, if the entire world is going to be flooded, we're talking an entire devastation of salt water. What about freshwater fish?
It happens slowly, it'll adapt.
Not only that, but what happens when you slowly, if you take salt water and begin adding a massive amount of fresh water on top of it, does the salt and the fresh water mix?
Yeah. Yes.
Freshwater fish could actually live at the upper levels of, the ocean or during the time that, the water is over the earth, and you'd have to get several feet down for the water to begin, it would then get brackish and then into the salt water where the saltwater fish would live below that. There's actually very little mixture there. If you look at pictures, say for example the Nile Delta or the Mississippi Delta in Louisiana, here in our own state, the Everglades, as fresh water flows out into salt water, have you ever seen how that water mixes together? It can actually go several miles out into the ocean before they finally mix. While it's there, that salt and fresh water do not mix. And one of the reasons for that is salt water has a different density than fresh water does. What's that?
So it's heavier.
Yep. So God, just simply by the way He created the dynamics of water, has already laid the groundwork to protect both fresh and saltwater animals in this. So fish, not there. They don't need to be put on the ark.
Dinosaurs.
However, we found that some dinosaurs are probably mammals and some are reptiles. Don't assume that every dinosaur was reptilian. Some were, but quite a few of them were found in the last few years probably were mammalian.
And many related to birds.
And well, now you're getting into evolutionary junk there. I'm not so sure I'll buy off on that one, but the point here is, there is actually plenty of biblical evidence to indicate that, you know, unlike what some people, oh well, dinosaurs died out in the flood. Well, maybe some, but
Of kind,
there is plenty of archaeological evidence where dinosaur fossils and human fossils have been found right next to each other. The dinosaurs did survive the flood. You know, one of the reasons why you don't find a lot of dinosaurs in the world today,
not real big enough.
well, two reasons. Yeah, that's the first reason right there. Because their lifespan is now considerably shorter, they don't have time to get to the size that they probably did before the flood. The second reason is hunters have a tendency to hunt things to extinction. But the Bible actually talks about, dinosaurs. Well, ocean dinosaurs, the Bible actually has a word for it called Leviathan. And what about the land dinosaur? Behemoth. And there's a psalm, I'll have to look it up, but see which one it was, but there is a psalm that actually describes what it calls a behemoth, and it says that its legs are like tree trunks. And if you read through it, it almost sounds like he's describing what we would today call a brontosaurus. So, yeah, dinosaurs were there, but here's another thing that we overlook. We assume, of course, when you start assuming things, it can get dangerous. We assume that all the animals that God put on that ark, and by the way, Noah didn't have to go out and scrounge up a bunch of animals. How do you think the animals got to the ark?
God sent them there.
God sent them there. But we make the assumption that all the animals were fully grown. That's an assumption on our part. There is nothing here in the Bible that says these were all full-grown animals. We'll use the brontosaurus, the dinosaur that you just mentioned, as an example. If you've ever seen a fossil of a brontosaur, he's a big booger.
You couldn't fit two of them on the ark.
You couldn't get them in there. They are big. But guess what? A yearling wouldn't be probably any bigger than a Great Dane. So don't assume that all these animals were adults. Also, if predation has already started by this point, which we do have evidence that we've seen already in the previous chapter, that animals as a result of the fall were already preying on one another. If you take a younger animal, I'll take a tiger as an example. If you brought a full-grown tiger in and let him loose here, what would that tiger probably do to us?
Eat us all.
Oh, it'd attack and kill every single one of us. But what about if you brought a tiger cub in?
Meryl would take it home and add it to his.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Meryl would have it at home feeding it treats. It would be entirely possible for all of these animals to survive, with male and female, if God simply brought them when they were still in their adolescent, time of their old enough to survive on their own. In other words, they wouldn't be dependent on their mother, but not yet big enough that they're going to start predating on everything else that's already on the ark. Plus, as far as predation, do you think that maybe God probably put it within them, each one, that God probably superseded their natural instinct to want to predate on one another, that while they were on that ark, those animals probably behaved themselves? Also, a lot of animals, you figure the first and second level of the ark, where there were no windows, unless Noah went in there with with a lantern or something of that sort, would have been pretty dark. What would have been the natural tendency for most of these animals to do during that
Sleep.
time? They'd have gone to sleep. And probably just rode it out. They might have woke up every once in a while and
The bears would have just slept through the whole trip.
probably the whole trip. So see, there's a lot of things that would have naturally occurred to preserve these animals that we don't think about, that we assume the worst when that may have not been the case. Lou?
No, of a kind, I guess that really, even that could tell you that, dinosaur is huge, but he's got a little lizard friend he could bring aboard or something like that too.
I'm glad you mentioned that issue of after their kind, because that brings up my next point. The Hebrew word that is used there when it says after their own kind does not mean species. I'll take cats as an example, since that's one of Merrill's favorites over here. You take the domestic cat, there's actually about a half a dozen different species of cats that are all could interbreed with a domestic cat. You've got African sand cats, there's what they call a Pallas cat,
Servals.
servals, bobcats. I mean, there's a dozen different varieties of cats that are all capable of interbreeding with one another. But the Hebrew word kind, guess what? Doesn't mean every single species. It means one basic, broad kind. Equine, for example, you've got horses, zebras, donkeys, ponies. What else?
No, I'm just thinking there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's been determined that, guess what? All of those horses, donkeys, zebras, I think ponies, and there's 2 or 3 others in there somewhere that I'm overlooking that I know is in the back of my mind. In all probability, they all descended from one ancestor. And if you don't think that's possible, look at the dog. What did dogs descend from? A wolf. And a wolf actually stands up about this tall. A wolf is a big animal. But yet, how many of you have ever seen dogs? You've got a couple at home. Little old yappy dog, no bigger than this. And it's hard to imagine that little old yappy chihuahua of yours descended from a wolf that stands up this tall.
She has an attitude.
She's got the wolf in her. I know those chihuahuas.
I know her dog.
Yeah. So, folks, Noah didn't have to take 2 of every single type of animal onto the ark. In fact, that is not what God told him. He said everyone after their kind. So all they would have needed is one horse-type animal, one wolf, that would all the dogs could have come from, one type of small cat that immediately. And by the way, if you look at lions, tigers, cougars, leopards, panthers, guess what? They're all capable of interbreeding with one another. So Noah would have only needed 2 of the bigger cats. And over a period of several generations, as they spread out, they the genetic differentiation that God created them with would naturally have produced different ones. Now you may be thinking, well, it sounds like evolution to me. No, because here's the difference. Those who claim that we all evolved from something, basically that's taking, a cat, then giving birth to a dog. Cats, they may be big, they may be little, they may be middle, but guess what?
Cats.
They're all still cats. Dogs are still dogs. Horses, or I should say equines, are still equines. They're all still the same kind. You don't see a raccoon descending from a dog. Dogs are still dogs. I mean, they're still, basically wolves in them. And just like your little chihuahua, he's got the attitude of a wolf. So, to reproduce after their own kind does not mean that a wolf is only going to produce a wolf. Sometimes eventually, as they differentiate, they can produce a dog, and it's not evolution, folks, because they're still canines.
Still in your genes.
And not only just wolves, but a coyote. Guess what? A coyote's he's a canine. Coyotes, wolves, dogs, they're all capable of interbreeding with each other. Now, what's interesting, though, is after they have separated, for example, just due to natural mutations, after, say, a coyote, develops, or a dog develops, it's only once in a blue moon, if there are no other choices, do these animals choose to interbreed with one another down the road. Once they tend to differentiate, there's a natural tendency on the part of the animal to want to separate. In other words, even though a wolf and a coyote are capable of interbreeding, what happens if you put a wolf and a coyote together?
The wolf kills the coyote.
The wolf will go for that coyote in a heartbeat. And same thing with the dog. The only time you can get that wolf to voluntarily interbreed with the dog is if that's his only choice. You put, say, if that's the only female that's available, they will. But given a choice, once they tend to differentiate, they will naturally spread out. That's how God has created them.
And what makes them different is their environment and
Mhm.
their living conditions.
Absolutely.
What changes the animal itself.
So what we see here is a 450-foot long by 75 feet wide by, 45-foot tall, 3-level boat that is extremely stable. And notice God told Noah to put rooms within it, so he's able to keep the animals separated. And I would not have wanted to do the stable duty in
That's
that.
what I was thinking, you need the air and everything.
That's why hopefully they're all
Noah's
sleeping.
sons weren't happy campers for those 40 days.
I would venture to say that probably none of them were real happy, trying to, muck out all that stable. But if you multiply that out and see just how much square footage there would have been inside the ark, it's real easy then, especially when you come to the conclusion here that those animals did not have to be full grown when God put them on there. If they were all of, say, just yearling age, he could have fit literally thousands on that boat, and they would have ridden out the storm. And as far as people, again, there's only 8 of them.
On that point, back to what Karen's question earlier. She said, how did they get the ark, to the water?
Uh-huh.
And we all pointed out the water came to the ark. Noah didn't need to build the ark on a spillway. The spillway came to the ark.
Mm-hmm.
But they also didn't need to go live on the ark for 20 years prior to the flood coming. I mean, it took them 100 years to build it, and they probably didn't move onto the ark until the flood was imminent. And
Mhm.
Well, because he gave them
as the
he
water
said
started
in
to
7
arrive-
days we'll do.
Mhm.
But what I'm getting at is when the water started to arrive and Noah and his sons and their family and all the animals are closed up inside of the ark, there must have been hundreds, if not thousands of people out there beating on the side of the ark, let us in, as the water is rising.
Wouldn't have been surprised at all.
They gave him 7 days before that.
Mm-hmm. And which we will see when I'm getting into chapter 7 here. But in chapter 7, we'll see that once God told them get on, we're told God himself shut the door.
And sealed it.
Mm-hmm. Noah didn't get to say, okay, Shem, Ham, you get over there. Japheth, come over here and help me. And they didn't have to do that. Chapter 7 tells us God shut the door.
God sealed it.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered about that. A door in the side of the ark is not an easy thing to seal.
Mm-hmm.
So are
Yep.
Are we saying that these people were in their hundreds when they were building this ark?
The people? Noah was.
Noah didn't start building it
No,
until he
it's
was
like-
500.
Yeah.
600 years old when he got in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, that was.
500 then wasn't like
That was
500
like
is
the
It's like
now.
50 now. 500 then was like 50 now.
Keep in mind that the average lifespan at that time in history was about 900 years, because God had, established human lifespan at that time. So don't think of this oh God, I'm 100 years old.
At
You
Matt's
know,
age now, he's
that's-
starting to have kids.
That may be what you're envisioning, but don't look at it that way. Just think that God had established human lifespan at that much. So when Noah was 600 years old, in our way of thinking, the way our lifespan is now, Noah would have been just a middle-aged man of, say, 40 or 45, something like that.
Yeah, fine.
And his sons weren't that old at that particular point. In fact, Shem, Ham, and Japheth were born after the time that God had told him, you know, that there was a flood coming. Any other questions?
If the window was at the top of the ark, didn't it rain in the ark?
No, because you're thinking on the top.
It's 18
Imagine
inches down
if this
from
is the top, if this is the roof of the ark, you're probably thinking, well, the window was here. No, the windows would have been alongside here, and if there would have been a sloping roof, just like right here, the windows would have been on the side with the roof of the ark overhanging it, so that it would have been on the top facing out, but not where the rain would come in.
Yeah, they're described as 1 cubit down from the top.
Yeah.
So that's right up what we would call a clear story window today.
You really probably needed a roof line to get that draw out those windows.
Well, the other thing too is keep in mind is you'll notice what the one thing God did not tell them to put on the ark. He said, take plenty of food with you, but notice what major item of necessity
Water.
got exactly. God didn't tell them to put any water on there. All they would have had to done is just stuck a
Pull the cup out the
a
window.
cup or something, pan, or had some kind of a little spillway, coming off the side that would have funneled water into, a basin or something on the inside. Yeah, they didn't need to worry about having plenty of fresh water. All they had to do is stick their hand out the window.
They
God
would've
was
had
going to
save-
supply all that anyone
What's
would
that?
ever
They
need.
would've had to save water, cause they were floating for a while after the rain.
Yeah. All right, anybody else? All right, well, let's